My father Richard held the heavy gold fountain pen like it was a royal scepter. He pressed the nib against the thick parchment paper and signed his name with a violent flourish. That single signature closed a $6 billion acquisition with Apex Corporation. The room erupted into applause. I watched my brother Marcus adjust his custom-tailored suit jacket, his chest puffed out like he had just conquered the world. I picked up my crystal flute of champagne, a genuine smile breaking across my face. We had done it. I had done it. But as I raised my glass toward Marcus, he did not raise his. His smile vanished. He reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick brown envelope, and slid it across the long glass table. It stopped right in front of my hands. I opened it, expecting bonus stock options. Instead, I found a termination letter. My brother had just sold the company built entirely on my algorithm for $6 billion, and his first act as the newly minted billionaire was to fire me. What he did not know was that the very contract they just signed was a ticking time bomb, and I held the only detonator. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your hard work stolen by a toxic family member who thought you would just quietly accept their disrespect. My name is Zoya. I am 32 years old, and I am the lead artificial intelligence architect and data scientist for Noir Tech. Or at least I was until about 5 minutes ago. Growing up in our household in Atlanta, the rules were never explicitly written on the walls, but they were permanently etched into every interaction. My father, Richard, was an old-school patriarch who firmly believed that wealth, power, and legacy belonged strictly to the men of the family. Women were meant to be supportive, decorative, and quiet. When my older brother Marcus turned 18, my father bought him a brand new luxury sports car and handed him a vice president title at his small logistics firm. When I turned 18 and got accepted into Spelman College on a full academic scholarship, my father simply patted my shoulder and told me to find a good husband who could provide for me. I did not look for a husband. I looked for code. I spent my college years barricaded in my dorm room surviving on cheap coffee and 4 hours of sleep a night. I was obsessed with machine learning and data architecture. I noticed a massive gap in the beauty industry technology space. None of the existing artificial intelligence could accurately analyze deep melanated skin tones. The algorithms were biased, broken, and completely useless for women who looked like me. So I built one myself. I spent thousands of hours writing the core code for an advanced skin tone analysis algorithm. It was flawless, it was revolutionary, and it was mine. When I showed my father the working prototype, he saw the dollar signs immediately. But instead of funding my startup, he insisted that we roll it into a new family venture. He called it Noir Tech. He named Marcus the chief executive officer. He told me that investors would not take a young black woman in her 20s seriously in the tech space. He said Marcus had the business degree and the corporate face, and I needed to stay in the background and focus on the technical work. I was young, naive, and desperate for my father's approval. So I agreed. I took the title of lead developer. I worked 80-hour weeks managing the servers, refining the algorithm, and scaling our cloud infrastructure. Marcus spent his days playing golf with venture capitalists, taking expensive business trips, and collecting massive salary bonuses while I was paid a fraction of my market value. He did not know the difference between a neural network and a spreadsheet, but he was the face of my genius. I stomached the disrespect for years because I believed we were building generational wealth for our family. I thought that when the big payday finally arrived, my father would finally acknowledge my brilliance and give me my rightful seat at the head of the table. That brings us to today. The Apex Corporation acquisition was the biggest tech deal of the year. The executive boardroom on the top floor of our downtown headquarters was buzzing with electric energy. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, the entire city skyline stretched out like a painting. The long conference table was crowded with Apex executives in sharp navy suits, their corporate lawyers reviewing the final stacks of paper, and my father and brother soaking in the glory. The scent of expensive cologne and freshly popped vintage champagne filled the air. I sat quietly near the end of the table, wearing a tailored emerald green suit. I felt a deep sense of pride swelling in my chest. The Apex Chief Technology Officer had spent the last 3 weeks absolutely marveling at my algorithm during the technical review. They were buying Noir Tech specifically for the proprietary code that I wrote from scratch. As the final signature was placed on the contract, my father stood up. He grabbed his crystal champagne flute and tapped it lightly with a silver spoon. The room fell into a respectful silence. I want to thank the incredible team at Apex for seeing the vision my father began, his deep baritone voice projecting effortlessly across the massive room. He looked around the table, making eye contact with the wealthy investors and corporate buyers. But most importantly, I want to raise a glass to my son. Marcus, you took a small idea and transformed it into a $6 billion empire. You steered this ship with unmatched leadership, incredible foresight, and brilliant innovation. You are the absolute pride of the family, and this company is a testament to your genius. To Marcus. The entire room echoed his words. To Marcus, they chanted, raising their glasses in unison. I kept my smile plastered on my face. I waited for my father to pivot. I waited for him to say, and of course to my brilliant daughter Zoya, the architect behind the technology. But the words never came. He simply took a sip of his champagne and sat back down. My heart sank, but I pushed the disappointment deep down into my stomach. I told myself that the money would make up for the lack of public praise. We were all about to be billionaires. We were about to secure our family for the next 10 generations. I raised my glass toward Marcus, offering him a silent nod of congratulations. That was when his smile disappeared. He set his glass down on the table, picked up his leather briefcase, and pulled out a thick brown envelope. He slid it down the smooth glass surface. It glided effortlessly and stopped right in front of my hands. I looked down at the envelope. It had my name printed on it in bold black ink. "What is this, Marcus?" I asked, my voice soft but steady, barely carrying over the low hum of conversations happening at the other end of the long table. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His eyes were cold and devoid of any brotherly affection. "It is a termination notice, Zoya," he said casually, as if he were discussing the weather. "And your severance package. The Apex executives want to bring in their own development team to scale the software globally. They need enterprise-level architects, not homegrown talent. We are restructuring, and your services are no longer required. You need to clear out your office by the end of the day." I stared at him, completely paralyzed. The words did not make any logical sense. Restructuring. Services no longer required. "I am the lead architect," I whispered, leaning in closer so the Apex team would not hear the panic rising in my throat. "I built the entire platform. You cannot fire me, Marcus. I own 20% of the founding shares." Marcus let out a short, patronizing laugh. He looked over at our father, who was suddenly very interested in the rim of his champagne glass. "Actually, Zoya, you do not?" Marcus replied, his tone dripping with absolute condescension. "You were brought on as a freelance developer, an independent contractor. We paid you a monthly retainer for your coding services. You do not hold any equity in the parent company. Check your original paperwork. The shares were vested based on executive milestones which you never met because you were just a back-end worker. You are only a contract employee." The room started to spin. The air felt incredibly thin. I looked over at my father, the man who had convinced me to trust him, the man who had drafted all the initial employment contracts when I was just a naive college graduate. "Dad," I said, my voice finally cracking with genuine emotion. "Tell me he is joking. Tell me you did not let him structure the company to lock me out of the equity I earned." My father finally looked up from his glass. His face was entirely unreadable. There was no guilt in his eyes. There was no remorse. There was only the cold, hard gaze of a patriarch protecting his favored son. He reached over, picked up the brown envelope, and pushed it exactly 1 inch closer to me. Do not make a scene and embarrass us in front of the buyers, Zoya, my father said, his voice dropping to a low, intimidating growl. Marcus made the right business decision. You are a talented coder, but you are not corporate leadership material. Inside that envelope is a $50,000 severance check. That is more money than most women your age make in a year. Be grateful for the opportunity we gave you. Take the $50,000 severance and leave. This is the legacy of the men in our family. I sat frozen in my chair. $50,000. They had just sold my entire life work for $6 billion, and they were tossing me $50,000 like I was a stray dog begging for scraps. They thought I was weak. They thought I was just a foolish little girl who would cry, pack her boxes, and quietly accept defeat. But as I stared into the smug faces of my father and my brother, the shock slowly began to melt away, leaving behind a cold, burning clarity. They had indeed tricked me out of the corporate shares, but they were too arrogant and too technically illiterate to understand the separate intellectual property filings I had quietly made years ago. I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. I simply picked up the envelope, stood up from the glass table, and walked out of the room. They had just sealed their own destruction. The heavy silence in the room was suddenly broken by the delicate clinking of gold bracelets. It was Chloe. My brother Marcus had married her 3 years ago, and she had spent every single day since then perfecting the role of the benevolent peacekeeper. Chloe came from generational wealth, the kind that allowed her to glide through life without ever facing a single consequence. She sat next to Marcus, dressed in a pristine pastel pink designer suit, her blonde hair perfectly blown out. She placed her pale hand gently over my brother's forearm, projecting an image of the supportive and grounded wife. Then she looked at me. Her lips curved into a soft, patronizing smile that made my blood run cold. She tilted her head, her blue eyes wide with what was supposed to be sympathy, but was actually pure condescension. "Oh, come on, Zoya," Chloe sighed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Do not make this harder than it has to be. Just take the 50 grand and go shopping. Treat yourself to a vacation. A single woman with too much money just gets taken advantage of anyway. You should be relieved. Running a global tech company is far too much stress for someone without a formal business background. If it were not for Marcus and his incredible vision, your cheap little app would never have sold for that price. He gave your hobby a platform. You should be thanking him instead of glaring at everyone." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air. My cheap little app. My hobby. The Apex executives at the other end of the table shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. They sensed the sudden drop in the room's temperature, but none of them intervened. They were just corporate buyers. They did not care about the toxic family politics as long as they got their hands on the intellectual property. I looked at Chloe. I looked at the way she sat there so utterly convinced of her own superiority. She was playing the ultimate white savior who was just trying to talk some sense into the emotional, ungrateful black woman. She actually believed her husband was a genius. She actually believed I was nothing more than a lucky amateur who stumbled into writing revolutionary code. I did not raise my voice. When you are a black woman in a corporate boardroom, any display of justifiable anger is immediately weaponized against you. They wanted me to yell. They wanted me to lose my temper so they could call security and label me unhinged. I refused to give them the satisfaction. I placed my hands flat on the cold glass table and leaned in, locking my eyes directly onto Chloe's. My cheap little app, I repeated, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly measured. "Let me clarify a few things for you, Chloe, since your husband clearly loves to rewrite history. When Marcus was 22 years old, he spent 8 months backpacking through Europe. He burned through our father's money, crashed rented sports cars in Monaco, and pretended to find himself. Do you know where I was at 2022? Chloe blinked, her patronizing smile faltering slightly. She opened her mouth to speak, but I did not let her. "I was at Spelman College." I continued, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "I lived on instant ramen and sheer willpower. I was working 3 separate jobs just to pay for cloud server space. I worked the opening shift at a campus coffee shop. I tutored undergrads in advanced calculus, and I took the overnight shift at the library. I slept 4 hours a night. I spent every waking moment outside of class teaching myself artificial intelligence architecture. I poured my soul into understanding the exact mathematical framework required to process complex pixel variations in dark skin. That was a problem the entire tech industry had ignored for decades. I built the neural networks. I wrote the machine learning algorithms. I did the grueling invisible work while Marcus was out drinking champagne on our father's dime. Marcus slammed his hand on the table, his face flushing deep red. "Watch your mouth, Zoya. Do not speak to my wife that way." I slowly turned my gaze to my brother. "You are the chief executive officer of a tech company, Marcus. Let us play a quick game. Tell the Apex executives exactly what programming language the core algorithm is written in." Marcus froze. His mouth hung open slightly, but no words came out. He looked at the Apex lawyers, then back at me. A visible vein throbbed in his neck. "It is highly technical," he stammered, adjusting his silk tie defensively. "That is exactly why we outsource the coding to people like you. My job is strategy. My job is the big picture. Your job is taking credit for my brilliance," I fired back, not breaking eye contact. "You could not write a simple line of code if your life depended on it. You do not have vision. You have a loud voice and a father who bought you a corner office. You sold my life work because you knew you could never manage it without me." "That is enough," my father barked, standing up from his heavy leather chair. His face was a mask of pure fury. "I will not have you disrespecting your brother and his wife in front of our partners. You are an employee of this company, and you have been terminated. I suggest you pick up that envelope and leave this building before I have security throw you out. You are acting exactly like a spoiled child." I looked at my father. He was the man who had always viewed me as an accessory to his son's success. He honestly believed he held all the power. He honestly believed he had outsmarted me. I looked back down at the brown envelope resting on the glass table. $50,000. It was an insult designed to keep me quiet. It was hush money. If I took it, I would be agreeing to their false narrative. I would be accepting my place at the absolute bottom of their hierarchy. I reached out and placed my hand firmly on the envelope. Chloe let out a soft sigh of relief. She clearly thought I was finally backing down and accepting my defeat. Marcus smirked, crossing his arms over his chest like a victorious king who had just crushed a minor rebellion. But I did not pick the envelope up. Instead, I slid it right back across the glass table. It glided smoothly, stopping directly in front of Marcus. "Keep the 50 grand, Marcus?" I said, a slow, icy smile spreading across my face. "You are going to need every single penny of it to pay your legal fees." Marcus frowned, his thick brows pulling together in confusion. "Legal fees? What are you talking about? Are you threatening to sue us? You cannot afford the retainers for the kind of lawyers we have." "Zoya, you signed a standard contractor agreement. You have absolutely no grounds to sue." I did not bother explaining it to him. I did not owe them an education. Let them celebrate their hollow victory for a few more hours. Let them cash the massive checks and buy their luxury yachts. The higher they climbed, the more devastating their inevitable fall was going to be. I reached down and grabbed my designer handbag from the empty chair next to me. It was heavy, but not from makeup or a wallet. Inside the hidden zippered pocket of that bag was a simple encrypted silver flash drive. It was no bigger than my thumb, but it contained the absolute master key to the entire Noir Tech system infrastructure. It contained the administrative authentication tokens, the root access codes, and the primary server licenses. But far more importantly, it contained the digital proof that the intellectual property was never legally transferred to Noir Tech. I owned it all through a completely separate limited liability company I had quietly formed years ago. The Apex Corporation had just paid $6 billion for a gorgeous corporate shell that contained absolutely nothing inside of it. I slung the bag over my shoulder, feeling the comforting weight of the flash drive pressing securely against my side. It was my insurance policy. It was my justice. I looked around the boardroom one last time. I looked at the Apex executives, who were now exchanging very nervous glances with their legal team. I looked at Chloe, whose arrogant smirk had morphed into a look of genuine unease. I looked at my father, who was staring at me with a mixture of anger and deep confusion. And finally, I looked at Marcus. "Congratulations on the sale, Marcus," I said softly, my voice echoing slightly in the large glass room. "Enjoy the view from the top while it lasts." I turned on my heel and walked toward the heavy oak double doors of the boardroom. I did not look back. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a woman who knew she held the entire world in the palm of her hand. I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the bustling hallway. The security guards were waiting for me, looking stern and ready for a physical altercation. I simply smiled at them, pressed the call button for the elevator, and waited patiently for the doors to open. They had absolutely no idea what was coming. They thought they had amputated a bothersome limb, but they had actually cut out their own heart. The countdown had officially begun. The master key was walking out the front door, and by midnight the $6 billion empire they had built on my back was going to crumble into absolute dust. Exactly 1 week had passed since I walked out of that glass boardroom. I spent those 7 days enjoying the quiet peace of my apartment, drinking expensive matcha lattes, and watching the digital clock on my wall tick closer to the inevitable explosion. I knew the Apex legal team was ruthless. I knew it was only a matter of time before they dug past the glossy financial projections and looked directly at the source code. Then the summons arrived. My father demanded my presence at his sprawling Buckhead mansion for the official Noirtech acquisition victory party. He sent a text message making it very clear that my absence would be seen as a public embarrassment, and he would ensure I never worked in the tech industry again if I embarrassed him. I decided to attend. Not because I was afraid of his empty threats, but because I wanted a front row seat to the exact moment their house of cards finally collapsed. The driveway of my father's estate was packed with imported luxury vehicles. Inside the mansion, a live jazz band played smoothly while Atlanta's elite sipped crystal flutes of vintage champagne and celebrated my brother's supposed genius. But I did not even get the chance to take off my coat or greet a single guest. The moment I stepped through the grand double doors, my father's head butler intercepted me. He did not offer me a drink or a welcoming smile. He gave me a tight, uncomfortable nod and immediately gestured toward the west wing of the house. "Mr. Richard requested you join him in the private library immediately," he said. His voice dropped to a low whisper. I followed him down the long corridor, the upbeat sound of the celebration party fading away behind us with every step. The butler opened the heavy mahogany doors of the library, ushered me inside, and pulled them shut with a solid, definitive click. The lock engaged. I was sealed in. The library was dimly lit, smelling intensely of aged leather and expensive cigars. My father stood by the stone fireplace, swirling a glass of neat bourbon in his hand. Marcus was pacing aggressively behind the massive oak desk, his tie already loosened, his hair slightly disheveled. They did not look like triumphant billionaires who had just closed a record-breaking tech deal. They looked like desperate men standing on a trapdoor with a rope tied tightly around their necks. Marcus stopped pacing the second he saw me. He picked up a thick stack of legal papers from the desk and threw them down. The heavy thud echoed sharply off the wood-paneled walls. "Sign it," Marcus ordered. He skipped the greeting entirely. His voice was strained and ragged, completely lacking that arrogant corporate polish he usually wore so proudly. I walked slowly over to the desk, maintaining perfect posture. I did not bother to pick up the gold pen he had aggressively placed next to the papers. I simply looked down at the top page. It was an intellectual property assignment agreement. I scanned the first few lines and immediately noticed the date printed at the top. It was completely backdated to 5 years ago, right around the exact time I first brought my algorithm to my father. "What exactly am I looking at, Marcus?" I asked smoothly, keeping my hands folded neatly in front of me. I already knew the answer perfectly well, but I wanted to hear them say it out loud. My father took a slow sip of his bourbon, trying to maintain his authoritative composure. It is just standard housekeeping, Zoya, a minor clerical oversight from when we first incorporated Noir Tech. The Apex legal team is conducting their final due diligence before the funds clear into our accounts. They are very thorough. They notice that your name is still technically listed as the primary author on some of the back-end architecture. We just need you to sign this standard release form transferring the complete ownership to the parent company so the lawyers can finalize the paperwork. Standard housekeeping, a clerical oversight. They were lying through their teeth and they were doing a terrible job of hiding their panic. Apex Corporation had the best corporate lawyers on the planet. They had audited the software registry and discovered the massive glowing red flag Marcus was too stupid to even look for. The algorithm, the neural network, the proprietary deep learning models. None of it belonged to Noir Tech. It belonged to Z Core Solutions, my private limited liability company. And Apex knew that if Noir Tech did not own the technology, the $6 billion valuation was completely worthless. I picked up the document, casually flipping through the dense legal jargon. "You want me to sign away my intellectual property rights for a company that just fired me," I said, raising an eyebrow at my brother. "You want me to backdate a legal document which constitutes federal corporate fraud so you can secure a $6 billion payday that you explicitly cut me out of last week." Marcus stepped around the desk, invading my personal space. His face was flushed with a volatile mixture of panic and absolute rage. "Do not play games with me right now, Zoya," he hissed, pointing a trembling finger right at my face. "You were a contractor. You built that code using company resources. It belongs to us. It belongs to Noir Tech. But those uptight Apex lawyers will not wire the money until every single administrative box is checked. You are going to pick up that pen and sign your name right now." I looked at his shaking finger. I looked at the sweat beading on his forehead. He was terrified. He was finally realizing that he had sold a luxury sports car without actually owning the engine. I dropped the papers back onto the oak desk and took a deliberate step back. "I did not use company resources, Marcus. I wrote that code on my personal laptop in my college dorm room before this company even existed. It is legally mine. You fired the only person holding the keys to the kingdom." My father stepped forward, slamming his glass of bourbon down on the mantelpiece so hard the crystal nearly shattered. "Enough," he roared, his deep voice shaking the walls of the quiet library. "You will not ruin this family. You will not sabotage your brother's future out of sheer spite just because you are jealous of his position. You will sign that paper right now, Zoya, or I swear to God, I will bury you so deep in litigation you will never see the light of day. I will drain every cent you have." Marcus slammed both of his hands flat onto the heavy oak desk, leaning aggressively over the backdated documents. "The Apex legal team is returning to our office at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning," he demanded, his voice dropping into a desperate, vicious snarl. "You are not leaving this room until that signature is on this page. Legitimize the record, Zoya. Sign the document." I looked at Marcus, leaning over the desk, the veins popping under his skin. The air in the library was thick with his desperation. Before I could even form a response to his pathetic threat, the heavy mahogany doors clicked open. Chloe slipped into the room, closing the doors softly behind her. She had clearly been listening from the hallway this entire time. She glided across the expensive Persian rug, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water, wearing that same fake benevolent smile she wore in the boardroom. She walked over to Marcus and placed a manicured hand on his shoulder, playing the role of the calming force. "Now, Richard Marcus, let us not raise our voices," Chloe said smoothly. She stepped up to the desk and looked at me with what she probably thought was maternal warmth. "Zoya, we are all family here. We all want what is best for the Noir Tech legacy. I spoke with Marcus before the party. We understand that $50,000 might have felt a little sudden and perhaps a bit cold. We know you worked hard on the technical side of things. so we are willing to offer you an additional $100,000 right now. She paused, letting the number hang in the air as if she had just offered me the moon. A cash bonus transferred directly into your personal account by tomorrow morning. All you have to do is sign the paper so the lawyers can finish their boring administrative paperwork. $150,000 is a lot of money for a single girl, Zoya. You could put a down payment on a beautiful condo. You could start a nice little consulting business. We just want to see you happy and settled. I looked from Chloe to Marcus and then to my father. They really thought I was that cheap. They thought my life's work, a revolutionary $6 billion technological marvel, was worth $150,000 and a patronizing pat on the head. They were trying to throw pennies at the architect while they moved into the palace I built. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. I straightened my shoulders, lifting my chin. Because I was taller than Chloe, and because Marcus was leaning over the desk, I ended up looking down at all of them. In that moment, the power dynamic in the room permanently shifted. I was no longer the obedient daughter. I was no longer the quiet sister working in the shadows. They were no longer the intimidating corporate titans they pretended to be. They were just three thieves who had been caught red-handed begging the security guard to let them out of the vault. I reached across the heavy oak desk and picked up the stack of backdated intellectual property assignment documents. Chloe smiled clearly, thinking I was reaching for the gold pen to sign my rights away. Marcus let out a heavy breath of relief. Instead, I gripped the thick stack of papers with both hands. I looked Marcus directly in the eyes, holding his gaze, to ensure he saw exactly what was happening. Then I ripped the entire stack cleanly in half. The sound of tearing paper was incredibly loud in the dead silence of the library. Chloe gasped, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. My father froze, his eyes widening in pure shock. I dropped the torn pieces right back onto the oak desk. They scattered over the polished wood like meaningless pieces of trash. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Marcus screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He lunged forward, grabbing the torn pieces of the contract as if he could magically tape them back together. "You just cost this family $6 billion. I will have you arrested. I will ruin you. I am in complete control of my mind," I said, my voice dangerously soft, but carrying perfectly across the silent room. "And more importantly, I am in complete control of my intellectual property." Let me spell this out for you, Marcus, since your expensive business degree clearly failed to teach you basic contract law. Noir Tech does not own the algorithm. Noir Tech never owned the algorithm. You have been using a free trial for the past 5 years. My father stepped forward, his face suddenly turning pale and ashen. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his authoritative voice finally cracking. "You built that code while working for us. We paid you a salary." "You paid me a contractor retainer," I corrected him sharply. "I built the foundation of that code under Z Core Solutions, my private limited liability company. I registered the copyrights and the patents under my entity long before NoirTech was ever incorporated. I granted NoirTech a commercial usage license. If either of you had ever bothered to read the actual employment contract you had me sign 5 years ago, instead of just assuming I was a naive little girl, you would have noticed clause section 4. I paused, letting the reality of the situation sink into their thick skulls. The licensing rights to the algorithm were explicitly tied to my active employment status at NoirTech. It was a revocable enterprise license contingent on my role as lead architect. Chloe gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles turning completely white. Her fake smile was entirely gone, replaced by a look of absolute horror. She finally understood the math. "When you handed me that termination letter in front of the Apex executives, I continued, taking a deliberate step closer to my brother. You did not just fire me. You legally terminated the software license. You severed the only legal tie NoirTech had to the core technology. You fired the vendor. You literally handed me the legal right to shut down the entire network." Marcus stepped back, his hands shaking violently. He blindly reached behind him, catching the edge of his crystal glass. It tipped over, crashing onto the hardwood floor and shattering into dozens of sharp pieces. The amber bourbon seeped heavily into the expensive Persian rug. "You cannot do this!" Marcus choked out, his voice trembling with sheer terror. He was hyperventilating now. "Apex will pull the deal tomorrow morning. They will sue us for corporate fraud. I have already leveraged my future shares to secure personal loans." "Zoya, you will bankrupt me. You will bankrupt the entire family." "That sounds like a you problem, Marcus," I said smoothly. I casually wiped my hands together, dusting off any imaginary residue from the torn contracts. I looked at the three of them. This was the family that had spent my entire life trying to keep me small, trying to diminish my light so my brother could shine. Now they were standing in the dark, begging me for a spark. "The free trial expires at midnight," I said. I turned around, unlocked the heavy mahogany doors, and walked out into the brightly lit hallway. I left them standing in the dim library, trapped in a massive financial nightmare of their exact own making. The clock was ticking, and they had absolutely no way to stop it. I drove back to my apartment in complete silence. I did not turn on the radio. I did not call my friends. I just listened to the hum of my car engine and the steady, powerful rhythm of my own heartbeat. When I walked through my front door, the city of Atlanta was glittering outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, completely oblivious to the digital earthquake that was about to strike. I walked into the kitchen, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and carried the warm mug into my home office. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair and woke up my computer workstation. The large dual monitors flared to life, casting a cold, sharp blue light across my face. The quiet hum of the cooling fans was the only sound in the room. I opened the master administrative dashboard for Z-Core Solutions. On the left monitor, I could see the live global traffic feeds for the NoirTech application. It was a beautiful, breathtakingly complex web of streaming data. Millions of active users across multiple continents were currently logged into the system. Women in Tokyo were using the application to analyze their skin for their morning routines. Makeup artists in London were relying on the real-time color matching tool for professional events. Dermatologists in New York were running diagnostic scans through the portal. The data flowed across my screen in a constant glowing green river of information. It was flawless. It was a masterpiece of modern engineering. But that river was flowing through a dam that I built with my own two hands, and my brother had just fired the person holding the floodgates. I glanced at the digital clock displayed in the upper right corner of my screen. It read 23:58, 2 minutes left. My phone was sitting face up on the smooth wood desk next to my keyboard. It was completely silent. Back at the mansion, Marcus and my father were probably scrambling. I imagined them screaming at their expensive corporate lawyers over the phone, frantically trying to find a legal loophole to force me to surrender the proprietary code. They were probably still hoping I was just making an angry, empty threat. They had spent my entire life assuming I would eventually fold under their pressure because that was what I had always done. They truly believed my silence in that library was a sign of weakness. 23:59, 1 minute left. I opened the master command terminal. The white cursor blinked steadily against the black background, waiting for my final instruction. My fingers hovered over the mechanical keyboard. I typed in the exact administrative override command to revoke the enterprise commercial license for NoirTech. The string of code was simple, elegant, and absolutely devastating. It was designed to immediately sever the authentication bridge between the NoirTech user interface and the Z-Core Solutions deep learning neural network. Without my back-end algorithm processing the data, their beautiful $6 billion app was nothing more than a pretty loading screen. The digital clock shifted. The numbers rolled over. 0000. Midnight. I took a deep breath, savoring the absolute stillness of my apartment, and I pressed the enter key. The response was instantaneous. On my left monitor, the glowing green river of live data stopped dead in its tracks. The active connection nodes began to drop one by one, cascading down the screen like a digital waterfall. Within 3 seconds, the entire global network map flashed a violent, glaring red. Access denied, license revoked, connection terminated. Millions of users around the world were instantly logged out of their accounts. Their screens went blank. The service they relied on vanished into thin air. Every single API endpoint completely collapsed. For 10 seconds, my apartment remained perfectly quiet. The blue light from the monitors reflected in my eyes as I watched the system flatline. Then the piece of plastic and glass sitting on my desk came alive. My phone began to vibrate violently, buzzing aggressively against the hardwood surface. The caller ID flashed brightly in the dark room. It was Marcus. I leaned back in my chair and let it ring. I watched the phone vibrate across the desk, imagining the sheer, unadulterated panic radiating from the other end of that line. The phone stopped ringing, went dark for a fraction of a second, and then immediately started ringing again. He was calling back to back. He was desperate. I picked up the phone, swiped to answer the call, and put him on speaker. I did not even get the chance to say hello. "Zoya, put it back online right now," Marcus screamed. His voice was shrill, completely devoid of his usual smug corporate confidence. He sounded like a terrified child. The entire network just crashed. The Apex monitoring system triggered a massive critical failure alert. Their chief technology officer just called my personal cell phone in the middle of the night. "The app is dead. Every single server is completely down. Put it back online immediately, or I will destroy you." I took a slow sip of my tea. The warm chamomile was soothing against the adrenaline pumping through my veins. "I am sorry, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat and professional. "I am not sure why you are calling me at midnight to discuss your technical issues. As you made very clear in front of the entire executive board this afternoon, I am no longer an employee of NoirTech. My services are no longer required. Stop playing these pathetic games with me," he roared, his voice cracking through the tiny speaker. "You know exactly what you did. You shut down the master servers. You are sabotaging a $6 billion corporate acquisition. Do you have any idea the kind of financial liability you are creating right now? The Apex lawyers are threatening to pull the entire deal if we do not show them a stable infrastructure by morning. My investors are panicking. You are ruining my life." I gently placed my mug down on a coaster. "I am not ruining your life, Marcus. You ruined it yourself when you decided to sell a product you did not own. The NoirTech enterprise license has expired. You do not have the legal right to access my servers anymore. I suggest you tell your engineering team to start writing their own algorithm, given your brilliant leadership and incredible vision. I am sure you can rebuild 10 years of advanced machine learning by sunrise. If you do not restore access right this second, I am calling the federal authorities," Marcus threatened. His panic was rapidly morphing into vicious, ugly desperation. "I will call the FBI. I will have them raid your apartment. I will press charges for cyber terrorism, corporate sabotage, and unauthorized computer access. You will spend the rest of your life in a federal prison. I will make sure you never see the light of day. I will ruin you, Zoya." I reached out and tapped a single icon on my phone screen. A small red dot appeared, indicating that the call recording feature was now active. I wanted his exact threats preserved for the legal bloodbath that was about to unfold in the morning. I leaned closer to the microphone, making sure my voice was crystal clear. "You cannot charge someone with unauthorized computer access when they own the computer, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "I did not hack your system. I did not deploy a virus. I simply packed up my personal property and left after you legally terminated my contract. You wanted to run a tech company without a technical founder. You wanted to wear the crown without carrying the heavy weight of the actual work. Well, now you have exactly what you asked for. You just fired the system administrator. Good luck running the servers." I pressed the red button and ended the call. The room fell silent once again, save for the gentle whir of the computer fans. The red error logs continued to scroll endlessly across my monitor, a beautiful testament to the empire that was currently burning to the ground. I turned off my phone, stood up from my desk, and walked to my bedroom to get some sleep. I had a very important meeting at the Apex Corporation headquarters in the morning, and I needed to look my absolute best. The morning sun broke through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse apartment, casting long golden shadows across the smooth hardwood floor. I woke up feeling more rested than I had in 5 long years. There was no anxiety tightening my chest. There was no dread about facing another day of being ignored and belittled by my own family. I walked into the kitchen, my silk robe trailing behind me, and began my morning routine with absolute precision. I ground fresh Ethiopian coffee beans, listening to the satisfying crunch as the rich aroma filled the bright room. I poured hot water over the dark grounds, watching the liquid drip slowly into my favorite ceramic mug. I was completely at peace while I knew the rest of my family was suffocating in the smoke of the fire they had started. My phone was sitting face up on the cool marble island. The screen was lit up with dozens of notifications. 3 missed calls from Marcus, 2 from Chloe, and 1 new voicemail from my father. I picked up the phone, tapped the screen, and put the message on speaker. My father's deep voice filled the quiet kitchen. He did not sound like the polished corporate patriarch who had confidently toasted to his favored son just yesterday afternoon. He sounded like a cornered, wounded animal. Zoya. He snarled through the tiny phone speaker, his breath heavy and ragged. You are an absolute disgrace. You are the stain of this family. You have humiliated me in front of my peers. You have ruined your brother's future, and you have destroyed the legacy I built for us. Turn those servers back on right now. If you do not fix this before the Apex executives wake up, I will make sure you are left with absolutely nothing. I will erase you. You will never be a part of this family again. I let the voicemail play out until the automated robotic voice announced the end of the message. I did not flinch. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, the stain of the family. That was exactly how he had always viewed me. In his eyes, I was never a brilliant architect. I was never a visionary. I was just a disobedient girl who was supposed to look pretty, marry well, and stay out of the way while the men handled the real business of building generational wealth. But I was never going to be that obedient little girl. When I was a junior at Spelman College, surrounded by brilliant, ambitious Black women who were preparing to change the world, I started writing the initial framework for the skin tone analysis algorithm. I spent countless hours in the campus library mapping out the complex neural pathways. I knew exactly what I was holding in my hands. It was revolutionary technology. But I also knew the reality of my family dynamic. I knew my father's fiercely patriarchal mindset. I knew that if I brought the finished code to him as just his daughter, he would pat me on the head, take the software, and hand all the credit and ownership to Marcus. He fundamentally believed that women were too emotional to handle the heavy burden of intellectual property. He believed our only purpose was to support the men. So before I ever showed him a single line of working code, I took action to protect my own brilliance. I took the little money I had meticulously saved from tutoring undergrads and working the early morning shift at a local coffee shop, and I hired a sharp business attorney in downtown Atlanta. I officially incorporated a limited liability company called Z-Core Solutions. I filed the complex patents, the strict copyrights, and the trademark applications entirely under that entity, with myself listed as the sole managing member and absolute owner. I legally insulated my hard work from my father's toxic greed. When my father eventually saw the prototype and decided to form Noir Tech, he immediately named Marcus the chief executive officer. They handed me a thick stack of standard employment contracts to sign. They thought they were trapping me in a poorly compensated invisible contractor role, but I quietly inserted my own specific licensing agreement into the massive pile of paperwork. I granted NoirTech a revocable commercial license to use the algorithm. Because they were so blinded by their own arrogance, and because Marcus was far too lazy to read a 70-page technical legal document, they signed it without ever realizing they did not actually own the product. They just rented it. And yesterday, in that glass boardroom, they legally evicted their own landlord. A sharp ping from my laptop interrupted my thoughts, bringing me back to the present moment. I carried my warm coffee mug into my home office and sat down at my glass desk. A new email had just arrived in my primary inbox. The subject line was written in frantic all-capital letters. Urgent. Cease and desist order. I clicked open the message. It was from a law firm I had never even heard of. A quick online search confirmed my suspicion. It was a discount attorney Marcus had frantically hired in the middle of the night, likely the only lawyer who would pick up the phone at 3 in the morning. The letter was a hilarious, desperate mess of standard legal jargon and completely empty threats. It demanded that I immediately cease my acts of cyber terrorism and restore full administrative access to the Noir Tech servers. It claimed I was in severe breach of my fiduciary duty to the company and threatened me with immediate federal injunctions and massive financial penalties if I did not comply by 8 o'clock this morning. I actually laughed out loud in my empty office. You cannot breach a fiduciary duty to a company that literally just fired you, and you certainly cannot be legitimately accused of cyber terrorism for simply locking the digital doors to your own legally owned property. Marcus was grasping at the thinnest of straws. He was trying to use intimidating legal words to scare me back into submission. He thought the mere threat of federal court action would make me crumble, just like it always did when we were kids, and he would threaten to tell our father on me for things I did not even do. But I was not a frightened kid anymore. I was a 32-year-old data scientist holding an unbeatable hand, and I knew exactly how to play my final cards. I did not type out a frantic emotional reply. I did not call Marcus to argue or defend myself. Instead, I calmly clicked the forward button on the email. I typed in the address of the senior partner at one of the most ruthless, elite, and expensive intellectual property law firms in the entire country. I had quietly drained my entire personal savings account to put their entire team on retainer 2 days ago, fully anticipating this exact scenario. I added a brief professional note to the top of the forwarded email. Good morning, gentlemen. The bait has been completely taken. Please review the attached threat from my brother's discount legal counsel and prepare the necessary counterattack. I will meet you at the Apex Corporation headquarters at 9:00 sharp. I moved the mouse and clicked send. I watched the progress bar quickly shoot across the screen. I finished the last sip of my coffee, closed my laptop with a satisfying click, and walked into my bedroom to get dressed. I needed to pick out the perfect suit. It was time to step onto the battlefield, and my enemies had no idea they were already dead. I was barely out of my silk robe and into my tailored emerald green power suit when the doorbell to my penthouse rang. It was not a polite single chime. It was a frantic, continuous buzzing, the kind of aggressive ringing that told me exactly who was standing on the other side. The security concierge downstairs usually screened all my guests, but my family still technically had emergency access clearance from when I first moved into the building. I walked calmly across the hardwood floor, the heels of my designer pumps clicking with quiet authority. I reached the heavy oak front door, looked through the digital peephole, and let out a slow, amused breath. It was Chloe. She did not look like the pristine pastel-wearing old money princess who had patronized me in the boardroom 24 hours ago. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy, uneven knot. She was wearing an oversized cashmere sweater that looked hastily thrown on, and her usually flawless makeup was entirely absent, revealing dark, heavy bags under her pale blue eyes. She looked completely unhinged. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open, just wide enough to stand in the frame, blocking her from stepping inside my sanctuary. "Good morning, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat and composed. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this unannounced visit?" "Zoya." "Please." Chloe gasped, her voice trembling violently. She reached out her fingers, wrapping desperately around the edge of the doorframe as if she were terrified I would slam it in her face. "You have to listen to me. You have to turn it back on. I am begging you." I leaned casually against the doorframe, crossing my arms over my chest. Turn what back on Chloe? The servers, the application, the algorithm? She stammered, tears actually welling up in her eyes. I have been awake all night. Marcus has been screaming at the lawyers since midnight. Apex is pulling out. The chief executive officer called Richard an hour ago. He said if the system is not fully operational and legally secured by noon, they are walking away from the $6 billion deal entirely. They are going to sue Noirtech for gross misrepresentation and corporate fraud. I tilted my head, studying her desperate face. It is truly a tragedy for Noirtech, I replied, my tone devoid of any sympathy. But as you so eloquently reminded me yesterday, I am just a single woman who was lucky to have Marcus give my little hobby a platform. Why does Marcus not just use his incredible vision to fix the code himself? Chloe let out a choked, wet sob. Please, Zoya, do not do this. Do not punish me for what Marcus and Richard did. I told them they should have paid you more. I told them they were being too harsh. But you know how your father is. You know he does not listen to anyone. I laughed, a sharp, cold sound that echoed in the quiet hallway. Do not try to rewrite history, Chloe. You sat in that boardroom and told me to take $50,000 and go buy some handbags. You smiled while they tried to erase my entire life work. You are not an innocent bystander. You are an active participant in their toxicity. So unless you have something legally binding to discuss, I have a very important meeting to get to. I began to push the door closed, but Chloe aggressively shoved her foot into the threshold, stopping the heavy wood from shutting. You do not understand, Zoya, she shrieked, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered terror. We are going to lose everything. Everything. I paused, keeping the door firmly wedged against her expensive designer shoe. They had always been wealthy. Even without the $6 billion Apex deal, my father had millions in real estate and logistics. Marcus had a massive trust fund. They were not going to be out on the street. They would just be embarrassed. You will be fine, Chloe, I said dismissively. Marcus can just go back to playing golf and pretending to be a logistics vice president. You will not starve. No, you do not understand the math. She cried, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes and running down her pale cheeks. The mask was completely gone now. There was no superiority left. Just naked, pathetic desperation. We did not wait for the deal to close, Zoya. We already spent it. I froze. I stared at her, my analytical mind instantly processing the massive, catastrophic implications of what she had just said. You already spent it. The ink on the preliminary agreement only dried yesterday afternoon. How could you possibly have spent it? Chloe swallowed hard, looking wildly down the empty hallway before lowering her voice into a frantic whisper. Marcus convinced the bank to give us a bridge loan. Actually, he convinced 3 different private equity banks. We leveraged his projected 20% stake in the $6 billion buyout. The banks saw the preliminary contracts from Apex and they approved the underwriting based on his guaranteed payout. How much? Chloe, I demanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. She squeezed her eyes shut, her shoulders shaking. $20 million, she whispered. I felt my jaw physically drop. $20 million. They had taken out $20 million in unsecured personal bridge loans based on a deal that had not even legally closed yet. It was the absolute pinnacle of financial arrogance and sheer stupidity. What exactly did you buy with $20 million in less than a month? I asked, absolutely fascinated by the depth of their financial ruin. Chloe looked down at her hands, twisting her massive diamond engagement ring frantically. The new estate in the Hamptons. It was $12 million. We closed last week. And the yacht. Marcus ordered a custom 80-foot azimuth yacht. That was another $6 million. And the rest went to paying off my personal credit lines and securing the interior designers. Zoya. The first massive loan payment is due in 30 days. If the Apex deal collapses today, we have absolutely zero liquidity to cover the interest, let alone the principal. The banks will seize the house. They will seize the boat. They will come after my family trust fund to cover the deficit. I will be completely bankrupt. My parents will disown me. I stared at her, letting the absolute magnitude of their self-destruction wash over me. They were so blinded by greed, so eager to live like billionaires, that they had essentially mortgaged their entire future on a foundation they did not even own. They had built a massive financial house of cards, and they had handed me the only fan in the room. Zoya. Please, Chloe begged, reaching through the crack in the door and trying to grab my sleeve. Just turn the servers back on. Just sign the intellectual property release. You can have the 150,000. You can have 500,000. I will personally write you a check from my trust fund right now. Just fix this. We are family. I looked at her pale, tear-stained face. I looked at the sheer terror in her eyes. I thought about the decades I had spent trying to earn a single scrap of respect from my father. I thought about the countless nights I spent writing the code that Marcus was currently trying to use to buy a yacht. I thought about how quickly they threw me away when they thought they had secured the bag. They did not see me as family. They saw me as a resource to be exploited and discarded. I reached out and forcefully removed Chloe's hand from my sleeve. I looked her dead in the eyes, ensuring she saw the absolute unbreakable resolve in my gaze. I do not care about your Hamptons estate, Chloe. I said, my voice as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm. I do not care about your custom yacht or your trust fund or your ridiculous private equity loans. You and Marcus made a $20 million bet with money you did not have, using a product you did not own. But Zoya, she sobbed, stepping closer to the door. They will take everything. We will be ruined. I placed my hand firmly on the heavy brass doorknob. That sounds like a white people problem, Chloe, I said softly. And I really do not care. I shoved the heavy oak door forward. She quickly pulled her foot back to avoid getting crushed, and the door slammed shut with a definitive, echoing boom. I immediately threw the deadbolt, locking her out. I could hear her muffled sobbing through the thick wood, followed by the frantic slapping of her hands against the door. I did not stay to listen. I picked up my designer briefcase, checked my reflection in the hallway mirror one last time, and headed for the private garage elevator. I had a meeting to attend, and I was not going to be late for the men who actually held the $6 billion. I stepped out of the private elevator and walked across the pristine concrete of the luxury garage. The echo of my heels was the only sound. I approached my sleek black Porsche Taycan, pressed the key fob, and slid into the soft leather driver's seat. The interior was perfectly silent, a stark contrast to the chaotic sobbing I had just left behind in my hallway. I placed my designer briefcase on the passenger seat right next to my handbag that held the master key flash drive. I pushed the ignition button. The electric engine hummed to life with a quiet, powerful vibration. Just as I was about to shift into drive, the screen on my center console lit up. The incoming call notification interrupted the smooth jazz playing quietly through the speakers. I looked at the caller ID. It did not display a random string of numbers. It clearly read Apex Headquarters. I smiled. The timing was absolutely perfect. I reached out and tapped the green accept button on the digital display. Hello, this is Zoya, I answered, my voice calm, professional, and entirely unbothered. Good morning, Zoya. My name is Harrison Cole. I am the Chief Technology Officer at the Apex Corporation. Good morning, Harrison, I replied smoothly. I have been expecting your call. There was a brief, heavy pause on the other end of the line. When Harrison spoke again, his tone was completely devoid of the usual corporate arrogance. He sounded incredibly careful, respectful, and slightly in awe. I imagine you have been, he said, letting out a short, tired breath. It has been a very long night for my engineering department. We had our entire crisis management team trying to bypass the server lockout. But your encryption protocols are absolutely brilliant. They are virtually impenetrable. Our best developers spent 6 hours trying to force a backdoor entry before they finally admitted defeat. Thank you, Harrison, I said, genuinely appreciating the professional compliment from a fellow tech architect. I built that security architecture from scratch. It is designed to withstand a brute force attack from a state-sponsored entity. A commercial engineering team was never going to crack it. No, they certainly were not. Harrison agreed readily. When we realized we could not break the lock, we decided to take a much closer look at the door itself. Our legal team and our senior forensic data analysts pulled the raw server logs. They traced the administrative revocation command directly back to the root ownership files. That was when we found the copyright registrations, the software patents, and the original enterprise licensing agreements. Harrison paused, and I could hear the distinct sound of shuffling papers in the background. We discovered that Noir Tech does not own a single line of the proprietary code we are trying to buy. The entire neural network, the deep learning algorithms, the skin tone analysis models, all of it is legally registered to a private limited liability company called Z-Core Solutions. And according to the Federal Registry, you are the sole managing member and 100% equity owner of that company. That is completely correct, I replied, resting my hands comfortably on the leather steering wheel. We tried to get clarification from your brother first, Harrison continued, his voice dropping into a tone of absolute professional disgust. When the servers first went down at midnight, Marcus told us it was a minor cloud hosting glitch. When we discovered the licensing discrepancy, a few hours later, we called him back. I personally asked him to explain the data architecture of the neural network. I asked him to explain the parameter weights in the machine learning model. Let me guess, I interrupted with a quiet laugh. He told you that was highly technical back-end work, and he is a big-picture strategy guy. Exactly? Harrison said, letting out a humorless chuckle. The man could not explain the difference between a local server and a toaster oven. He spent 20 minutes screaming at me, threatening to sue us if we delayed the wire transfer and dodging every single technical question I asked. It became violently clear to everyone in the room that Marcus was nothing more than a puppet. He was wearing the suit and playing the part, but he had absolutely no idea how the machine actually worked. We realized we have been negotiating with the wrong person this entire time. I listened to his words, feeling a deep, profound sense of vindication wash over me. For years, my family had treated me like I was invisible. They had shoved me into the background, convinced that the world only cared about men in expensive suits with loud, confident voices. But the corporate world was ruthless. It did not care about my father's patriarchal delusions. It cared about the bottom line. It cared about who actually held the keys to the $6 billion kingdom. And the second the illusion shattered, Apex completely bypassed the golden child and came straight to the source. Zoya, the Apex chief executive officer, and the entire board of directors are currently sitting in our main conference room. Harrison said, his tone shifting into serious business mode. We want the algorithm. It is the most advanced piece of cosmetic technology we have ever seen. And we are not going to let this deal fall apart because of your brother's fraudulent misrepresentations. We want to cut Noirtech out of the equation completely and negotiate directly with Z-Core Solutions. With you. I leaned back against the headrest, looking out at the cold concrete walls of the parking garage. The ultimate victory was sitting right there in the palm of my hand. I could just drive to their office, sign a new contract, and walk away a billionaire while my family crumbled in my rearview mirror. But I did not just want the money. I wanted the complete, undeniable destruction of their arrogance. I wanted to look my father and my brother in the eyes the exact moment they realized they had lost absolutely everything. I am very interested in discussing a direct acquisition, Harrison, I said smoothly. But I have one non-negotiable condition for this meeting. Name it, Harrison replied instantly. We are prepared to be highly accommodating. I want the meeting to take place at your headquarters in exactly 1 hour. I instructed, my voice dropping into an authoritative, commanding cadence. And I want Marcus and my father Richard sitting at that conference table. Harrison hesitated for a fraction of a second. Zoya, given the hostile nature of your brother's recent communications, I am not sure putting him in the same room as you is the most productive environment for a high-level corporate negotiation. We were planning to formally terminate our letter of intent with Noir Tech via email in about 10 minutes. You can terminate it in person, I insisted. Call Marcus right now. Tell him the engineering team has found a workaround for the server crash. Tell him you need him and Richard to come to the Apex headquarters immediately to sign the final technical transfer documents and close the deal. Make them believe they have won. Make them believe they are about to receive their $6 billion payout. There was a long silence on the line. I could hear the faint murmur of voices in the background as Harrison likely relayed my demand to the Apex chief executive officer sitting next to him. "Are you planning an ambush?" Zoya Harrison asked, and I could hear a faint trace of amusement in his voice. "I am simply ensuring that the men who tried to steal my life work are present to witness its actual sale," I replied coldly. "I want them to sit in those expensive leather chairs, feeling completely victorious right up until the exact moment I walk through the door. They need to understand exactly who holds the power. If they are not in that room, I will not be either. And I will take Z-Core Solutions to your biggest competitor by the end of the day." I did not need to make an empty threat, and Harrison knew it. The technology was worth every penny, and Apex was not going to risk losing it to a rival tech giant over a petty family dispute. "Understood," Harrison said, his tone returning to strict professionalism. "I will make the call to Marcus immediately. I will tell him to bring his father for the final signature. They will not be told that you are attending. We will have our legal team prepare the revised acquisition documents for Z-Core Solutions in the meantime. We will see you in 1 hour, Zoya." "Thank you, Harrison," I said. "I will see you soon." I ended the call. The cabin of the Porsche returned to absolute silence. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I did not look like the quiet, obedient daughter who used to sit in the corner of the room, waiting for her father's approval. I looked like a woman who was about to orchestrate the most devastating corporate execution in modern history. I shifted the car into drive, pressed my foot down on the accelerator, and drove out of the dark garage into the bright, blinding light of the morning sun. The trap was set. All I had to do now was walk in and close the cage. The towering glass and steel structure of the Apex Tower loomed against the bright morning sky. It was a monolith of corporate power, the kind of building designed to make ordinary people feel incredibly small the moment they stepped inside. But as I pulled my Porsche into the VIP valet parking circle, I did not feel small at all. I felt like a giant. I handed my keys to the valet, grabbed my designer briefcase, and walked through the heavy revolving glass doors into the main lobby. The lobby was a massive expanse of brilliant white marble, brushed steel columns, and aggressive modern art. My emerald green heels struck the polished stone floor with a sharp, rhythmic click. Every single step echoed with absolute authority. I did not walk with the hesitant, nervous posture of an employee who had just been brutally fired by her own family. I walked with the steady, measured cadence of a woman who completely owned the ground beneath her feet. The security guards at the front desk did not even ask for my identification. The head of security simply nodded respectfully and swiped his master keycard to grant me access to the private executive elevator banks. Waiting for me by the elevators were the two senior partners from the elite intellectual property law firm I had hired just 48 hours ago, David and Eleanor. They were corporate apex predators. David had sleek silver hair and the cold, unblinking eyes of a shark. Eleanor was sharp, immaculate, and carried a thick leather briefcase that held enough legal ammunition to sink a battleship. They did not bill by the hour. They billed by the victory, and they were entirely on my payroll today. "Good morning, Zoya," David said, offering a tight, professional smile. "We have reviewed the finalized acquisition documents with the Apex legal team. Everything is perfectly in order. We have the copyright certificates, the original patent filings, and the corporate registry for Z-Core Solutions ready for presentation." "Excellent," I replied, stepping into the glass elevator as the doors smoothly slid open. "Let us go put this entire situation to rest." The elevator ride to the top floor was completely silent. I watched the digital floor numbers tick rapidly upward. It felt like watching the final seconds of a countdown clock ticking down to a controlled demolition. When the elevator doors finally chimed and opened onto the executive floor, the atmosphere was instantly different. The air was thick with tension. We walked silently down the plush, carpeted hallway toward the main executive boardroom. The front wall of the boardroom was made entirely of frosted glass, allowing sound to carry through the slight gap near the heavy double doors. I held up my hand, signaling David and Eleanor to stop walking. I wanted to listen. I wanted to hear exactly how deep a grave my brother was digging for himself before I pushed him in. "Jonathan, I give you my absolute word this is nothing to worry about," Marcus was saying. His voice was entirely too loud. It lacked his usual, smooth, arrogant corporate polish. He sounded frantic, breathless, and incredibly desperate. "It is just a minor technical glitch. We experienced a temporary server lockout caused by a disgruntled former employee. We had to terminate a mid-level back-end contractor yesterday afternoon, and she decided to throw a childish tantrum on her way out the door by messing with the administrative passwords." There was a brief pause, followed by the deep rumbling voice of my father. Richard was attempting to project his usual calm patriarchal authority, but I could hear the severe tremor hiding just beneath his words. "My son is handling it perfectly, Jonathan. We have our absolute best internal engineering teams bypassing her little blockade right now. We are a family of integrity. We would never bring you a defective product or hide critical information. The $6 billion valuation is completely secure. If we could just proceed with the final signatures on the transfer documents this morning, the system will be fully operational before the ink is even dry." I stepped closer to the clear glass panel near the door handle and looked inside. The visual was even more pathetic than the audio. Marcus was standing near the edge of the massive mahogany conference table. His expensive custom suit jacket was unbuttoned, his tie was completely crooked, and large dark sweat stains were bleeding visibly through the underarms of his light blue shirt. He was sweating profusely, shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot. My father was sitting rigidly in a heavy leather chair next to him. Richard looked pale and physically ill. He was continuously rubbing his chest with his right hand, as if he were actively trying to massage away a rising panic attack. Sitting at the very head of the table was Jonathan Sterling, the Chief Executive Officer of Apex. Harrison Cole stood quietly right behind Jonathan. They were surrounded by a small army of Apex corporate lawyers. Jonathan was looking at my brother with an expression of cold, polite detachment. He did not look angry. He looked fascinated, like a scientist observing a bug thrashing around in a jar. Jonathan already knew the absolute truth. He already knew about my patents and my limited liability company, but he was letting Marcus hang himself with every single lie that fell out of his mouth. I had heard enough. I reached out, placed both hands firmly on the heavy brass handles of the mahogany double doors, and pushed them open. They swung inward with a heavy dramatic thud that instantly sucked all the air out of the room. The sudden noise echoed loudly against the glass walls. Every single head in the massive boardroom snapped toward the entrance. Marcus froze mid-sentence. His mouth hung completely open, his jaw practically hitting the floor. The remaining color instantly drained from his sweaty face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. My father dropped his hand from his chest, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated shock. He gripped the leather armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. "Zoya Marcus," hissed his voice, dropping into a venomous, panicked whisper. "What the hell are you doing here?" He spun around to face the Apex executives. "Jonathan, I apologize. This is the disgruntled contractor I was just telling you about. Security. Someone call building security right now. She is trespassing. She is trying to sabotage this meeting." I did not answer him. I did not flinch. I did not explain myself. And I did not even look at him. I walked right past my brother as if he were nothing more than a stain on the expensive carpet. My emerald green heels echoed loudly against the hardwood floor with a terrifying rhythmic precision. David and Eleanor walked right behind me, perfectly synchronized their presence, radiating undeniable, devastating legal authority. I scanned the room. There was only one empty chair left at the massive mahogany table. It was the VIP leather seat positioned directly to the right of the Chief Executive Officer. It was the chair traditionally reserved for the most important guest of honor in any corporate acquisition. My father had clearly been saving that exact seat for Marcus to sit in once the final contract was brought out for signatures. I walked straight up to that chair. I placed my designer handbag squarely on the polished wood table, pulled the heavy leather chair out, and gracefully sat down. I smoothed the lapels of my emerald green power suit, folded my hands neatly in front of me, and turned to look directly at the chief executive officer of Apex. "Good morning, Jonathan," I said, my voice perfectly calm, clear, and carrying beautifully across the dead silence of the room. "I apologize for the slight delay. I had to deal with a minor pest control issue at my apartment this morning. Shall we begin the actual negotiations?" Jonathan Sterling leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He did not look at my father, he did not look at my brother, he kept his eyes locked entirely on me. "Good morning, Zoya," he replied, his voice smooth and incredibly calm. "I am glad you could make it. Please make yourself comfortable. We have quite a bit of ground to cover." Marcus slammed both of his hands onto the mahogany table. His face was flushing a deep, dangerous shade of crimson. "Jonathan, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice cracking with panic. "I told you this woman is a disgruntled former employee. She has absolutely no authorization to be in this building, let alone at this table. If your security will not remove her, I will call the police myself." Jonathan did not even blink. He simply raised a single finger, silencing my brother instantly. "Sit down, Marcus," Jonathan commanded. The tone was not a request. It was an absolute order from a man who held a $6 billion check. "You are no longer in a position to make demands in my boardroom." My father reached up and grabbed Marcus by the sleeve of his expensive suit, roughly pulling him back down into his chair. Richard was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his tailored shirt. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to stop whatever I was doing and fall back into line. But the invisible leash he had used to control me my entire life was completely broken. Jonathan nodded to the older man sitting to his left. It was the lead corporate counsel for Apex Corporation. The lawyer stood up slowly. He reached across the table and picked up the massive leather-bound portfolio that contained the final Noir Tech acquisition contracts. It was the exact document my brother and my father had been desperate to sign just moments ago. "Gentlemen," the Apex lawyer began, adjusting his silver-framed glasses. "Over the past 24 hours, our forensic data teams and intellectual property attorneys have conducted an emergency audit of the Noir Tech digital infrastructure. This audit was initiated after a catastrophic global server failure at exactly midnight." Marcus opened his mouth to speak, likely to repeat his lie about a technical glitch, but the lawyer held up a hand to stop him. "During this audit, we discovered that the root administrative access to the core neural network was legally and permanently revoked," the lawyer continued. "We also discovered exactly why it was revoked." The lawyer held up the thick leather portfolio. He looked at Marcus with an expression of pure professional disgust. Then, in a completely silent room, he dropped the entire portfolio into the metal trash can sitting next to his chair. The heavy thud echoed violently against the glass walls. "Noir Tech is a hollow shell," the lawyer stated coldly. "It is a beautiful marketing facade wrapped around an empty box. Your company does not own the skin tone analysis algorithm. It does not own the machine learning patents. It does not own the underlying code that makes the application function. You sold us a $6 billion house without disclosing that you did not actually own the land it was built on. Your enterprise license was tied directly to your lead architect, and yesterday afternoon you explicitly terminated her. You severed your only legal connection to the product." My father looked like he had just been physically struck. He stared at the metal trash can, his entire legacy sitting at the bottom of it. But Marcus did not go quiet. His panic instantly mutated into blind, irrational rage. "That is a lie," Marcus screamed, jumping out of his chair so fast it tipped backward and crashed onto the floor. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "She is a thief. She stole that code from us. She used Noir Tech servers, Noir Tech computers, and Noir Tech funding to build that algorithm. She is committing corporate espionage right in front of you. She is trying to steal family property. I will sue her into oblivion. I will have her arrested for grand larceny. I did not react to his screaming. I did not defend myself. I simply sat there radiating ice-cold composure, watching him unravel. His face was practically purple, the veins in his neck bulging as he desperately tried to regain control of a narrative that was already dead. He was a man drowning in a teacup, thrashing wildly because he had never actually learned how to swim. I did not need to speak because I had brought my own weapons. Eleanor, my lead intellectual property attorney, stepped forward. She placed her heavy leather briefcase onto the polished mahogany table and snapped the brass locks open. The sound was sharp and precise. She reached inside and pulled out a single pristine folder. She did not raise her voice to match Marcus. She did not need to. True power never has to shout. That is a very fascinating accusation, Marcus, Eleanor said smoothly as she extracted a document from the folder. However, it is fundamentally impossible to steal something that you created before the victim even existed. Eleanor slid the crisp piece of paper across the long table. It glided perfectly, stopping right in front of Jonathan Sterling. Jonathan picked it up, adjusting his reading glasses. What you are looking at, Mr. Sterling, is the official federal copyright certificate and patent registration for the core neural network architecture, Eleanor explained, her voice ringing with undeniable authority. I draw your attention to the filing date stamped at the bottom right corner of the document. Jonathan looked at the date. A small, impressed smile touched the corners of his mouth. The registration date is exactly 10 years ago. Eleanor continued, turning her sharp gaze toward my sweating brother. 10 years ago, noir tech was not even a concept. 10 years ago, Richard had not yet provided a single dollar of funding. 10 years ago, my client Zoya was a 19-year-old undergraduate student studying data science at Spelman College. She wrote the foundational code in her dormitory. She filed the patents using her own meager savings. She registered Z-Core Solutions as a completely independent legal entity long before she ever sat down at a noir tech desk. Marcus stared at the document in Jonathan's hands, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. She did not steal family property, Eleanor stated, delivering the final crushing blow to the silent room. She protected her own intellectual property from a family that clearly intended to exploit her. Zoya is the sole uncontested legal owner of the technology you want to buy. Noir Tech was simply renting it. And as of yesterday, the lease is officially over. The boardroom fell into a silence so profound it felt like a vacuum. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning vents high above our heads. Jonathan Sterling kept his eyes locked on the federal copyright document my attorney had just slid across the table. He reached out with quiet deliberation and traced his index finger over the raised federal seal at the bottom of the page. He was a man who had built his career on recognizing absolute leverage, and he knew instantly that he was looking at the undeniable truth. Jonathan slowly looked up from the piece of paper. The camera of my memory captures this moment perfectly. It was a slow, agonizing push inward on the chief executive officer of Apex as he completely shifted the balance of power in the room. He did not look angry. He looked entirely resolved. Richard, Jonathan said, his voice completely devoid of warmth. When Apex Corporation engages in a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, we operate on the fundamental assumption of good faith. We assume the executive leadership sitting across the table actually owns the assets they are attempting to sell. My father tried to speak, but his voice completely failed him. He simply sat there, his mouth slightly open, clutching his chest, as if his heart were struggling to keep beating. What you and your son have attempted to do here today constitutes gross misrepresentation and fraudulent inducement. Jonathan continued, his tone turning as sharp as shattered glass. You presented forged narratives. You attempted to sell proprietary technology that legally belongs to an independent third party. You lied to my legal team. You lied to my engineering department, and you lied directly to my face. Marcus frantically gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning stark white. "Jonathan, please, we can fix this," Marcus begged, his voice cracking into a high, desperate whine. "We are a family. We can bring Zoya back onto the Noir Tech payroll right now. We can consolidate the assets. We can offer you a discount on the final acquisition price. Just give us an hour to draft a new internal agreement." Jonathan looked at my brother with a level of disgust usually reserved for insects. "There is no internal agreement to be made, Marcus. You are a massive legal liability. As of this exact moment, Apex Corporation is officially terminating our letter of intent with Noir Tech. We are withdrawing our $6 billion offer. We are canceling the deal. Your company is worth absolutely nothing to us." The words struck my brother like a physical blow. He staggered backward, bumping into the wall behind him. The $6 billion empire he had bragged about, the massive personal loans he had taken out, the custom yacht, the Hamptons estate. All of it evaporated into thin air in a matter of seconds. Noir Tech was dead. Jonathan completely ignored the devastating collapse of the two men sitting across from him. He turned his chair, shifting his entire focus directly to me. His cold corporate demeanor softened just a fraction, replaced by genuine professional respect. "Zoya," Jonathan said smoothly, "I have reviewed the technical specifications of your algorithm. My engineering team has spent the entire night analyzing the framework of your neural network. It is without question the most sophisticated piece of deep learning architecture this industry has ever seen. You built a masterpiece. And you had the incredible foresight to legally protect it from the very beginning. That tells me you are exactly the kind of brilliant strategic mind Apex wants to be in business with." I nodded slowly, acknowledging the compliment while maintaining my perfect posture. "Thank you, Jonathan. Because we no longer have to deal with the bloated corporate shell of Noir Tech, we have significantly more capital to allocate directly to the actual creator of the technology," Jonathan explained. He gestured to his lead counsel, who immediately opened a brand new leather portfolio and extracted a thick stack of freshly printed documents. The lawyer placed them gently on the table directly in front of me. "We would like to bypass the middlemen entirely," Jonathan announced, his voice echoing clearly across the silent room. "Apex Corporation is officially offering to acquire Z-Core Solutions and all associated intellectual property for a revised sum of $6.5 billion. The number hung in the air, heavy and absolute. $6.5 billion. $500 million more than they had offered my family. It was the ultimate validation. It was the undeniable proof that I was the true value in the room and that my brother was nothing more than a parasite who had been dragging my worth down for years." A sudden guttural scream shattered the quiet professionalism of the boardroom. It was Marcus. The complete realization of his absolute failure finally broke his mind. He had lost the company. He had lost the money. He was drowning in tens of millions of dollars of unsecured personal debt. And the sister he had spent his entire life belittling was walking away with a prize larger than anything he could have ever imagined. "You thief!" Marcus roared, his face contorted into a mask of pure violent rage. He pushed off the glass wall and lunged aggressively across the massive mahogany table. He knocked over crystal water pitchers and scattered legal documents everywhere. His hand stretched out, aiming directly for my throat. He wanted to physically destroy the woman who had just intellectually dismantled him. But I did not even flinch. I did not move a single muscle to defend myself. Before Marcus could even clear the center of the table, the Apex security detail reacted. Two massive men in dark suits stepped out from the corners of the room. They moved with terrifying speed. One guard grabbed Marcus by the collar of his expensive custom suit and violently yanked him backward. The second guard swept his legs. Marcus crashed heavily onto the floor, the breath knocked completely out of his lungs. The guards instantly pinned him face down against the expensive carpet, twisting his arms behind his back with practiced painful efficiency. "Get off me!" Marcus screamed, spitting violently onto the floor as he thrashed against the immense weight of the security guards. "She is stealing my life. She is stealing my company. Dad, do something. Help me." My father stood up, his legs shaking uncontrollably. He took one step toward his son, but the Apex lead counsel immediately stepped in his path, holding up a stern hand to stop him. "Richard, I highly suggest you sit back down," the lawyer warned coldly. "If you interfere, we will have you both arrested for corporate assault." Richard froze. He looked down at his golden child, the son he had built his entire legacy around, who was currently pinned to the floor, screaming and crying like a petulant toddler. Then Richard slowly turned his head and looked at me. His eyes were completely hollow. He finally understood the massive, unforgivable mistake he had made. He had backed the wrong child. He had traded a brilliant, loyal daughter for a foolish, arrogant son, and it had cost him everything. I looked down at Marcus struggling on the floor, and then I turned my attention back to the fresh acquisition contract resting in front of me. The document was beautiful. It was the culmination of 10 years of sacrifice, countless sleepless nights, and an unwavering belief in my own worth. All it needed was a signature. I looked across the table. During the chaotic scuffle, the heavy gold fountain pen my father had brought to sign his fraudulent contract had rolled across the polished mahogany wood. It came to a stop just a few inches from my right hand. It was the exact same pen Richard had used yesterday afternoon when he proudly toasted to the legacy of the men in our family. I reached out and picked the heavy gold pen up. The metal was cool and solid against my skin. I twisted the cap off with a soft, satisfying click. I looked down at my brother, who was still panting heavily against the floor, staring up at me with eyes full of absolute venom and terrified defeat. I smiled at him. It was a genuine, radiant smile. Then I lowered the golden nib to the thick parchment paper. With smooth, elegant strokes, I signed my name at the bottom of the $6.5 billion contract. I lifted the golden nib from the thick parchment. The ink glistened for a brief second before settling permanently into the page. I placed the cap back onto the fountain pen with a sharp, definitive click. It was done. I was officially the sole owner of a $6.5 billion fortune. I slid the signed contract across the mahogany table back to Jonathan Sterling. He took it, offered a firm nod of profound respect, and handed it to his lead counsel to finalize the escrow transfers. From my standing position, I looked down at the chaos unfolding on the floor. It was the perfect, high-angle view of a collapsing dynasty. Marcus was still pinned face down against the expensive corporate carpet by the two massive security guards. His cheek was squashed against the floor fibers. His custom suit was wrinkled and torn at the shoulder seam. He was no longer screaming. The violent adrenaline had completely drained out of his body, replaced by the crushing, suffocating weight of his new reality. He was hyperventilating, his eyes darting wildly around the room like a trapped animal. Sitting just a few feet away from him, my father looked as though he had aged 20 years in the span of 5 minutes. Richard was slumped heavily in his leather chair, clutching his chest with a trembling hand. His usually pristine silver hair was disheveled. The arrogant patriarchal posture he had maintained for my entire life was entirely gone. He was just a broken, tired old man who had bet his entire legacy on a losing horse. Then a sharp, piercing sound cut through the heavy silence of the boardroom. It was a cell phone ringing. During his frantic, aggressive lunge across the table, Marcus had dropped his phone. It was currently resting face up on the polished wood, vibrating violently against the mahogany. The screen was brightly lit. I glanced down at the caller ID. It was the Executive Wealth Management Division of the primary private equity bank that had issued him the massive bridge loans. The financial algorithms in the corporate banking world operate with terrifying speed. When Apex Corporation officially withdrew their $6 billion offer, internal alerts were triggered across multiple financial institutions. The collateral securing Marcus and Chloe's $20 million fantasy had just evaporated into thin air. The phone stopped ringing for exactly 1 second before it immediately started vibrating again, Then a barrage of text messages began to flood the lock screen, lighting up the display with rapid-fire notifications. I could read the preview text clearly from where I stood. Urgent notice. Asset freeze initiated. Margin call alert. Immediate contact required. The banks were not calling to check on him. They were calling to inform him that his accounts were locked. They were calling to seize the custom yacht he had bragged about. They were calling to initiate foreclosure on the $12 million Hamptons estate before he even had the chance to move his designer furniture inside. The financial guillotine had dropped. Marcus saw the screen flashing from his pinned position on the floor. A low, pathetic whimper escaped his throat. He stopped struggling against the security guards entirely. The reality of his absolute ruin washed over him, completely paralyzing him. He was going to face multiple lawsuits from furious investors. He was going to face the federal authorities for securing loans using fraudulent asset declarations. His wife was going to abandon him the moment she realized the money was truly gone. He was utterly and completely destroyed. Zoya. The voice was so weak, so fragile that I almost did not recognize it. I turned my attention away from the ringing phone and looked at my father. Richard had leaned forward in his chair. He was reaching a trembling, wrinkled hand out toward me. His eyes were entirely bloodshot, filled with a desperate, pathetic sorrow. "Daughter," my father whispered the word, catching painfully in his throat. "Please, we are family. You cannot leave us like this. I built Noir Tech for you. For both of you. You have the money now. You have the power. Please just pay off the bank loans. Save your brother from prison. Save our home. I am begging you." I stared at the man who had spent my entire life trying to shrink me. I thought about the decades of emotional coldness, the constant belittling, the blatant favoritism. I thought about how he had looked me dead in the eye just 24 hours ago in this exact same room and handed me a $50,000 severance check while telling me I was nothing but a disposable contractor. He only remembered I was his daughter when he realized I held the keys to his salvation. He did not love me. He loved my leverage. I picked up my designer handbag from the table. I adjusted the strap over my shoulder, ensuring my posture was absolutely flawless. I looked at Richard, letting all the residual anger and hurt simply fall away. I did not feel rage anymore. I just felt an overwhelming sense of cold, liberating indifference. "You were right, Dad," I said, my voice perfectly steady and echoing clearly in the silent boardroom. I threw the exact words he had used against me right back into his face. "Noir Tech is the legacy of the men in our family. It is exactly what you both deserve. You and Marcus can keep that empty shell. I have my own empire." I did not wait for his response. I did not look down at Marcus weeping on the floor. I turned my back on both of them. David and Eleanor, my brilliant legal team, instantly fell into step right behind me. We walked toward the heavy glass double doors. The Apex security guards stepped aside to let me pass, offering me quiet nods of respect. I walked out of the boardroom, out of the toxic shadow of my family, and into the absolute freedom of my new life. The bright afternoon sun hit my face the moment I stepped out of the heavy revolving doors of the Apex Tower. I took a deep breath of the crisp city air. It tasted like absolute freedom. The valet rushed forward, holding the door open as I slid into the soft leather driver's seat of my black Porsche. I placed the $6.5 billion contract onto the passenger seat next to my handbag. I pressed the ignition, feeling the quiet hum of the electric engine vibrate through the steering wheel. I pulled out of the VIP parking circle and merged onto the bustling Atlanta highway, leaving the glass monolith and my broken family far behind me in the rearview mirror. 3 months have passed since that morning in the boardroom. The corporate world moves with terrifying, ruthless efficiency, and the fallout from the collapsed Noir Tech acquisition was swift and absolutely brutal. Marcus learned the hard way that corporate America does not care about family legacy or golden child status. When Apex Corporation officially withdrew their offer, the massive private equity banks that had issued Marcus his unsecured bridge loans immediately initiated a forensic audit. They quickly discovered that Marcus had leveraged $20 million based on a finalized term sheet that he legally could not fulfill. He had pledged intellectual property he did not own as collateral. The banks did not just freeze his accounts, they reported the glaring discrepancies to the federal authorities. Today, my brother is currently under active investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission for gross financial misrepresentation and wire fraud. His passport was confiscated to prevent him from fleeing the country. He traded his custom-tailored Italian suits for endless, grueling depositions in sterile federal office buildings. Because his assets were entirely frozen and seized, he could no longer afford his elite crisis management attorneys. He is now relying on a court-appointed defense lawyer who is desperately trying to negotiate a plea deal that might keep him out of a federal penitentiary. Chloe did exactly what anyone who understood her true parasitic nature expected her to do. The moment the banks initiated foreclosure on the $12 million Hamptons estate and seized the custom yacht, she filed for divorce. She cited irreconcilable differences, but the reality was simply irreconcilable poverty. She unleashed her family's ruthless trust fund lawyers on Marcus, aggressively fighting to extract whatever pitiful assets he had left before completely jumping ship. She moved back into her parents' sprawling estate in Connecticut and immediately began playing the victim for the local tabloids. She claimed she was a naive, trusting wife who was completely unaware of his fraudulent business practices. She erased Marcus from her life as easily as wiping off a bad shade of lipstick. My father faced the ultimate patriarchal nightmare. He lost his legacy, and more importantly, he lost his pristine public image. Noirtech folded within 30 days of the catastrophic server lockout. Without my algorithm, the company was just a useless corporate shell, drowning in massive overhead costs and furious investors demanding their initial seed money back. To pay off the immediate corporate debts, an attempt to fund a legal defense for his favorite son Richard had to liquidate absolutely everything. He quietly sold the sprawling mansion in Buckhead. He auctioned off his prized luxury vehicle collection. Last week I read the public notice stating that Richard had officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. He now lives in a modest two-bedroom condo on the outskirts of the city, completely alienated from the high society circles he used to dominate. The wealthy men he used to drink expensive bourbon with do not return his phone calls anymore. In the cutthroat world of Atlanta elite, there is no greater sin than losing your fortune through sheer incompetence. People often ask me how it feels to watch my family completely self-destruct. They expect me to say I threw a massive party, popped expensive champagne in my penthouse, and danced on the ashes of their empire. But the truth is much quieter than that. Watching your family ruin their own lives is not a cinematic fist-pumping victory. There was no joy in reading my father's bankruptcy filings or seeing my brother's name in federal indictments. I did not celebrate their downfall. The only emotion I truly felt, and the only emotion I still feel today, is a deep, profound relief. The heavy, suffocating weight of their expectations that I had carried since childhood was finally gone. For my entire life, they demanded that I set myself on fire, just to keep them warm. They wanted me to surrender my brilliance so my brother could pretend to be a genius. But I refused to play the role of the tragic, obedient victim. I did not use anger-screaming matches or petty revenge to win. I used the strict parameters of American contract law, my intellect, and my unbreakable boundaries. I read the fine print. I protected my intellectual property. I let their own blinding arrogance lead them directly into the trap they built for themselves. I am now the Chief Executive Officer of Z Core Solutions, leading a massive global integration with the Apex Corporation. My algorithm is setting the new gold standard for inclusive technology across the beauty industry. I sit at the head of my own boardroom table, and I never have to wait for anyone to give me permission to speak. I protected my work, and in doing so, I finally protected myself. I am sitting back in the exact same spot where this story began. The warm, soft light of my penthouse living room is casting a gentle glow across the space. I am leaning back against the plush fabric of my sofa, finally breathing in the absolute peace of my new reality. In my right hand, I am holding a crystal glass of deep red vintage wine. I take a slow, appreciative sip. The taste is rich, complex, and entirely earned. I lower the glass and look directly into the camera, looking right at you, the person who has stayed with me through every twist and turn of this unbelievable journey. It has been quite a ride. When I first sat down to tell you this story, I promised you a tale of betrayal, corporate espionage, and a $6 billion blindside. But looking back on everything that happened, from that humiliating termination in the glass boardroom to the final signature on my own acquisition contract, this story was never really just about the money. The billions of dollars are a wonderful byproduct of my hard work, but they are not the true victory. This story has always been about something much more valuable. It is about self-worth. For years, society and culture conditioned me to believe that blood is thicker than water. We are taught from a very young age that we must endure abuse, disrespect, and exploitation, simply because the people hurting us share our last name. We are told to keep the peace. We are told to be the bigger person. We are told to shrink our own ambitions so that the golden child can shine brighter. But I am here to tell you that family is not an excuse to let others exploit you. A shared bloodline is not a free pass for someone to steal your brilliance, silence your voice, or treat you like a stepping stone to their own success. People love a good revenge story. They love the idea of a fiery, explosive confrontation where the villain is completely destroyed by the hero in a screaming match. But true power does not require you to become a monster to defeat one. The sweetest revenge is not destroying them. The sweetest revenge is simply letting them destroy themselves when you reclaim what is rightfully yours. I did not have to ruin my father or my brother. I did not have to plant false evidence or spread vicious rumors. I just had to take back the foundation they built their fragile egos on, and gravity did the rest of the work. I let the cold, hard reality of the law execute the justice that my family refused to give me. You might be watching this right now feeling trapped in your own version of noir tech. Maybe you have a sibling who takes all the credit for your hard work and emotional labor. Maybe you have parents who constantly diminish your achievements because you do not fit into their narrow, outdated expectations. Maybe you are sitting in a room right now doing all the heavy lifting, while someone else stands at the front, taking all the applause and collecting all the rewards. I want you to listen to me very carefully. Your silence is not buying their love. It is only funding their disrespect. You do not owe your loyalty to people who view your talent as a disposable resource. You are allowed to read the fine print of your own life. You are allowed to legally and emotionally protect your energy, your time, and your creations. You are allowed to stand up from the table when respect is no longer being served. Have you ever had to use the law to protect yourself from your own blood? Have you ever had to enforce an unbreakable boundary against the people who were supposed to protect you? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one, and I know how isolating it can feel to be the black sheep who finally decides to bite back. Share your experiences, because your story might be the exact spark someone else needs to finally stand up for themselves. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories about navigating toxic family dynamics, surviving corporate battles, and taking back your absolute power. We are building a strong community of people who refuse to be undervalued ever again. Remember the most important lesson I learned in that glass boardroom. Know your worth. Because if you do not, someone else will price you at zero, and you are worth an entire empire.